Hi everyone, welcome to Wade's World on Wednesday. As usual, the idea is that we discuss difficult and contentious subjects, and in this instance I've chosen, I would like to present to you guys the case for apartheid reparations. Now, reparations for war is as old as war itself. Whether the loser agrees with the reparations or whether it's forcibly taken is an entirely a different matter. Now, what many people don't know is that the first known instance of war reparations is the example of Rome imposing the onerous sum of 66 tons of silver on Carthage in the year 241 BC, after the First and Second Punic Wars, also known as the Treaty of Lutatius. Essentially, reparations are intended to cover damages or injuries inflicted during a war on the victim, and the terms refers to money or goods changing hands. So typically, the victims would be paid. So let's start at the more recent history. Post-World War II, the Allies at the Potsdam Conference imposed equally onerous compensation payments on the Axis powers as follows: on Italy, Japan, Germany, and for goodness sake even Finland, because remember Finland joined the Axis powers and had a war with Russia. Billions of dollars changed hands internationally, from monies, goods, land, and even intellectual property, to the tune of more than, at that time, 1948, $10 billion that the Americans and the Soviets extracted, or for all intents and purposes stole from Germany. Things like patents, copyrights, registrations, people, and technology. And what I'd like to discuss is the two cases of compensation payments made during World War II. Absolutely unique in that for the very first time, the victims of the war started making claims against the aggressors, with the most famous case being the German payments to the victims and families of the Holocaust. In 1958, 1959, end of 58, early 1959, Germany paid the Israeli government 58 billion Deutschmark, sparking a huge debate in the Knesset under the then Prime Minister Golda Meir. Holocaust survivors have received a total of $100 billion since 1952. Now this excludes, and I think we have to make a note of this, pension payments and indeed cash payments for psychiatric trauma counseling. Israel has received all kinds of ad hoc assistance from Germany in the fields of technology, the sciences, agriculture, engineering, and even the odd freebie submarine. Yes, even the odd freebie submarine, folks. This compensation transformed Israel from an agrarian society in the early 50s to a veritable flower of the desert, boasting a thriving first world economy that today Israel exports 30% of its GDP as at 2018. The other even more remarkable example is the tale of the two Germanys. With the collapse of the Soviet Union and the cessation of the Cold War, East Germany was almost very quickly absorbed into West Germany, and they became a unified country. Under Helmut Kohl, West Germany then began the arduous process of rehabilitating the East German infrastructure and social structure. Typically, the first thing they started with is making sure that the retired communists that were against them received their regular monthly pensions, and reviving the economy through placing an extra tax on all the West Germans, and the West Germans were happy to do this. So think of this for a moment. As of 2019, it is estimated that the German government would have invested or spent in the order of $3 trillion on the East Germans as of 2019, which is this year. Now, what makes this feat all the more remarkable is that West Germany wasn't in any way responsible for the economic and social predicament of these Germans, yet they understood the value of a financial kickstart and chose to take the long view. You can maybe even say that they exercised their social empathy for them. Meanwhile, in South Africa, the outgoing president of the National Party regime, one F.W. de Klerk, also understood the value of financial security. So during the course of the negotiated settlement, he struck a deal with the ANC that all white MPs that served for 10 years in Parliament only will receive a golden handshake of 1 year's full salary up front, right? A full month's salary adjusted for inflation annually for the rest of their lives, and in the event of their deaths, their spouses would receive 3/4 of their salary for the rest of their natural lives. adjusted for inflation, of course. Now that's an extraordinary right position to be in. Now just bear in mind, hanging in the background is the expectations that black people will be compensated as well. It may not have been spoken about, but they were. So let's look at our story for financial restitution and land repatriation for the victims of generational apartheid and white supremacy. Let's consider the internationally accepted legal precedents that our government, in collaboration with the corporatized media, chooses to withhold from us. The United Nations 1973 Convention on Apartheid declared it to be a crime against humanity. Loosely translated, it was systemic genocide, not unlike the Jewish Holocaust, just much slower and by other means. So we have to be very clear about that. It's a derivation of the Holocaust in slow motion. A little known fact that again they keep from us, both the current government and corporatized media, is Resolution 217A111 adopted by the UN General Assembly as far back as the 10th of December 1948. Now it states the following: the United Nations Basic Principles on the Right to a Remedy and Reparations to the Victims of Gross Violations of International Human Rights Law and Serious Violations of International Humanitarian Law. Obligation to respect, ensure, respect for, and implement international human rights law and international humanitarian law. 1. It says that the obligation to respect, ensure respect for, and implement international human rights law and international humanitarian law as provided for under the respective bodies of the law emanates from A. Treaties to which a state is a party. In that instance, it applies to South Africa because we are signatory of that. Number 2, so B rather, customary international law. C, the domestic law of each state, which means, and number 2, if they've not already done so, state shall, as required under international law, ensure that their domestic law is consistent with the international legal obligations by, as follows: A, incorporating norms of international human rights law and the international humanitarian law into their domestic law. In other words, change the constitution, no matter how vaunted and great and first of all our constitution is, or otherwise implementing them in their domestic legal system. So far as I know, we haven't done this. B, adopting appropriate and effective legislation and administrative procedures and other appropriate measures that provides for fair, effective and prompt access to justice. No sane person can suggest that victims of apartheid has experienced that in South Africa, the black victims specifically. C, and now this is important, making available adequate, effective, prompt and appropriate remedies, including reparation as defined below. D, ensuring that their domestic law provides at least the same level of protection for victims as required by the international obligations. In other words, there must be a synergy or congruency between international law, which is considered higher up, and the country's, the constitution of the country. It must be noted, folks, and please bear this in mind, that there's no statute on limitations on this resolution. So in other words, it lasts forever ad infinitum. Now, see, if I were to provide you with a snapshot of our negotiated settlement in a nutshell: 1, the ANC agreed to adhere to the following: pay off the old apartheid debt. They had very little choice in that regard. 2, not nationalize any banks, companies, organizations, or white-owned land. 2, not arrest anyone for war crimes, which in a sense is counterintuitive. 3, ignore all the tenets of its own freedom charter, right? Essentially for the sake of power, albeit, and I'm being very clear on this, political power only. And then not explicitly offer the victims of apartheid any form of financial redress, amongst others. Notice that redress isn't a key article in our much vaunted constitution. In fact, very little is made of it. So I don't see the value of a constitution that is as touted as ours is, that without us as citizens extracting the kind of value that we expect from it. Now this makes our government one that doesn't comply, in a sense, with international law, of which it is a signatory. I'm sure it's the first time you folks are listening to this. I believe that for the sake of peace, in effect, South Africa is brazenly flouting key international laws and worse still, behaving as if it has a higher moral ground, right? And that this outstanding issue will somehow simply go away. Right? In my view, the South African government are at this point in violation of very clear international laws and therefore a borderline rogue state, insofar as its actions or lack thereof that negatively impacts its own people. So for the first time, I'm saying that South Africa is a borderline rogue state because it flouts international laws, international conventions, that it is a signatory to itself. The madness, the depravity, the perversion of not paying reparations for the crimes and the systemic brutality of apartheid is that a black government is missing an opportunity to do something groundbreaking and morally significant. And as a businessman, our President Cyril Ramaphosa must know that the practical implications of compensation of that magnitude translates into an immediate economic boost, similar to the one the Israeli government and the victims of the Holocaust experienced way back then. Thank you very, very much. I hope you join me next week. What I'm going to be doing is talking through options for reparations for the victims of apartheid and systemic white supremacy in South Africa. So we'll explore perhaps 2 or 3 options that I've worked on about a year or 2 or so ago. I hope you enjoyed it. Just remember, please tune in next time for Wade's World on Wednesday. And folks, thinking is living. Bye.